Hello, everyone, and those watching at home. Welcome to City Council Workshop. Today is February 27th, and to start us off, I'd like to ask Councilmember Roberto to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please stand as you're able. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Johnson, please call the roll.
Councilman Fugit, Councilwoman Helsley, Councilwoman McKenzie, Councilwoman Ryder, Councilman Roberto,
here.
Councilwoman Singh, Vice Mayor Smith,
Here.
Councilman Thomas. 6 members present, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Oh,
Councilwoman Parker. Yeah.
all right. Thank you for that. Thank you for everybody who is here in attendance and those for you watching at home, those who will watch this on a recording. We are here today because council has deemed this a very important matter, and we all know it is in our community, the issue of housing. And we've talked a lot about this. We've funded important efforts in this regard, and including the Office of Housing Stability. So we've got the presentation from Executive Director Aaron Reed, who leads that organization. I don't know if it's new anymore. I don't know how long we can call it new anymore, but today we'll hear from Director Reed about the city's efforts and as part of the Housing Stability Office, efforts to reduce housing shortage, homelessness, and increase services to that end. So with that said, council, I encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. You can also, we have some time at the end for additional questions that don't get asked. But for now, I'll invite Director Reed, please come up and introduce yourself to the audience, and we'll get going.
Oh, I was looking for a way to get to move the podium up a bit, but I think this is great.
Thank you. You also have the honor of being the last person to present or speak in this room. For our next council meeting on Tuesday, we'll be back in the large main assembly room. And so, without further ado.
Thank you very much. So I am Erin Reed, the Executive Director of the Knox County Office of Housing Stability. And indeed, you are right, Councilman Smith, the city has done a lot of amazing work in trying to get our housing stock up where it needs to be to help boost the market forces at work. And I'll talk a little bit about our strategic planning process. Okay. There we go. Got it. So I'll start off with a little bit of background about the history of the office and COC governance. COC stands for the Continuum of Care. That is the continuum of homeless services in Knoxville and Knox County. That's the geography defined by HUD that defines our COC. I'll talk a little bit about the state of homelessness according to the data that we have. I won't spend a lot of time on that since we had the chance to discuss that just a couple of months ago. I'll talk through some system modeling that we've been able to do using data from the Homeless Management Information System, HMIS. And then I'll give you an update on the strategic planning process and the priority needs that are bubbling up from our conversations with the community. But first, I do want to start with an update on warming centers. They were open for 32 nights between November 29th and February 22nd. That's about a third of the winter, really. We had 7 churches and 3 nonprofits that were directly running sites. On our busiest night, January 21st, we sheltered 387 people, and that is in addition to the beds at CARM. So that number that you're seeing is over and above the 370 or so beds that CARM has, and that were full for pretty much all of those cold nights. Over the course of the entire 32 nights, warming centers provided over 7,600 bed nights. I had to check my math on that twice, but it is correct, over 7,600 bed nights. And this is the second winter that we've had a centrally coordinated effort around this, and it was a great success. I feel really good about that, and I think that lives were saved, cases of frostbite were avoided, and remediated by the availability of a warm place to be. And I also wanted to introduce my team. I have a team now, so I wanted to introduce Ariel Benson. She's our program manager. Would you stand up so that people can see you? And then also Brittany Rosette Jones. She is a coordinator with us. So we're a team of 3 now, which feels really nice. And they're both doing incredible work and moving us forward and reducing homelessness. Working with our board of directors, we now have a vision and a mission. We envision a Knox community where homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring. Our mission is to align diverse partners and resources to house people quickly and effectively and use evidence-based approaches and the insight of lived experience to ensure an integrated system that functions with respect, compassion, and accountability. I know that's a lot of words, but each one is important. And now kind of a brief look back at the past year and a half. So in August of 2023, the Office of Housing Stability was established. And that winter, we had year 1 of warming centers. We operated that winter for 8 days, not 32, but 8 very intense days, as many of you know, since many of you brought food and supplies and helped out at those warming centers. So thank you. Then the month after that, in February, we worked with Homeless Coalition and the city of Knoxville to hire consultants to help out of Houston, Texas, to help us overhaul the governance of our continuum of care. So the reason that matters, the reason that I've put that up there, is that the levels of funding that HUD is willing to give to our community is directly based on how well we follow their guidelines in governing our community, our continuum of care. And so these consultants come from a very successful COC. Houston is a COC that has managed to cut its rate of homelessness in half. So their contract ends today. They've done a lot of really good work with us. I'll talk a little more about it in a moment. That very next month after they were hired, we had the Homelessness Summit with Julia Orlando from Bergen County, New Jersey. Many of you were there for that. She made a very powerful case for homelessness being solvable. Later last year in October, the governance changes that the consultants had helped us prepare were implemented or initiated. They're still going on right now. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then that next month in November, we started year 2 of warming centers. And that has went on until February 22nd. And then in December of that year, public input for our strategic planning process began. So we've been very busy, extremely busy. So these COC governance changes, I've talked about what a COC is. We've been working with these consultants for a year to better align with HUD standards. And as I said, aligning with HUD standards has very real consequences for our community, because the better we do, the higher our score, and the more likely we are to get projects funded through HUD. At least that has been the case in the past. I know things are changing, but I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like. So, so a couple of the biggest changes in the governance of our COC are we are constituting a new decision-making body, a new COC board. Up until now, the Homeless Coalition had been acting as COC board. That had some definite advantages, and the Homeless Coalition was doing great work and continues to do great work. And they have made the decision to create a new body to make decisions on behalf of the COC. And they also made the decision to delegate lead agency duties to the Office of Housing Stability, which is great. That is what I had been hoping for from the beginning, so I'm really happy that that happened. One of the big takeaways here is that this new COC board, which will be constituted this spring, we're in the process of doing that right now, must approve the strategic plan. So according to HUD standards, this new COC board has to be the body that approves our strategic plan. That's one of the reasons I don't have a comprehensive strategic plan to show you right now, is because it hasn't been approved by the COC board yet. And indeed, the COC board doesn't exist quite yet.
Director Reed?
Yes.
Just one question. So just to clarify, the Office of Housing Stability will retain its own board as a lead agency of the COC, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So that, you're right. So we're going to retain our own board to look after the health and the mission of Office of Housing Stability as an organization. The COC board's role will be very different. Their role is going to be to look after the health and the mission of the entire continuum of care.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, and please do pop up with questions. I don't think anyone wants to hear me talk for 20 minutes straight. So an update on homelessness in our community. On an average day, we have about 2,300 individuals accessing homeless services. That is up from 1,000 people a day in 2018. So you can tell we're really seeing a very marked increase in homelessness in that time. Looking back at the fourth quarter of last year, the individuals who became homeless during that quarter, 2/3 of them became homeless either because of eviction, the lack or loss of a job, or they could not find affordable housing. And so what we are seeing there is really that it is the lack of housing stock and the lack of affordable housing stock that is driving homelessness in our community. For every 4 people who became homeless that quarter, fourth quarter last year, 2 exited the system housed. And so what you see there is that we really do have a problem with inflow and outflow. So we have 4 people becoming homeless, but only 2 exiting the system housed. There's a major backlog in there. I'll be talking about that quite a bit. And this has a bearing on the concept of functional zero, which you'll hear more about later in the presentation. But reaching functional zero, typically for a specific audience like veterans or youth, means that we have fewer people becoming homeless than people who are getting housed. So more people getting housed than who are becoming homeless. So functional zero can be a little misleading because it sounds like no one is homeless. That is not, in fact, what it means. It just means that we can keep up, because right now we can't keep up.
Can I jump in?
Please.
And Vice Mayor, do you want us to jump in?
Yeah,
or-
please.
Okay. How long, with what you were just talking about, so someone is now experiencing homelessness for the reasons that you just talked about. 2/3 of them can't find affordable housing, had job loss, or were evicted. Is there any data on how long when that occurs until somebody finds housing after that? Do you have anything like that you could talk to us about?
I do. And what I can tell you is that for people who are able to successfully move through the system, it takes a little over 4 months right now. And that's a long time when you're homeless. But I'll talk about that in more detail in a couple of slides, so I'm glad you asked that question. So this graph of chronic homelessness, I think when we talked last, I said that I was going to print this out and carry it in my pocket because it's a really important graph. It shows that we were really winning the battle against chronic homelessness until about 2017, 2018. Chronic homelessness means that someone has been homeless. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, your mic was on. I
It's
just
okay, I'm
wondered.
just gonna leave it on.
Oh, okay, perfect. So chronic homelessness means that someone has been homeless for longer than a year and they have a disabling condition. A disabling condition, if you've been living on the streets for a year, chances are you have gathered a couple of disabling conditions. Living on the street in Knoxville is very, very rough on people's physical health and their mental health. We have a lot of people in our homeless population who report having physical disabilities, mental health disorders, and a lot of that is either caused or exacerbated by living on the street. So in 2018, we really started to see this uptick in chronic homelessness. There are a couple of things going on there. The two biggest takeaways are housing prices really started to go up at that time. The housing market started to tighten. That's part of what is going on with forcing more people into homelessness. The other thing, I've said that these are people who are homeless longer than a year. So when someone becomes homeless right now, we don't have enough resources in the community to help them quickly. And so what we see are people lingering in homelessness until they've been there longer than a year. Whatever disabling conditions they had that were under control are no longer under control. Their diabetes is uncontrolled because they have no place to store their insulin. Their bipolar disorder is out of control because their medication keeps getting stolen. I mean, any number of reasons. The bright spots, those drops that you see, from 2010 to 2011, from 2016 to 2017, and then in 2021, those are where we have permanent supportive housing facilities opening. And so whenever you see a big drop like that, it's because we had a permanent supportive housing facility open up. And what we know from local data now is that permanent supportive housing works for us. Over 95% of people who go into permanent supportive housing remain stably housed in the long term. And that's whether or not they remain in permanent supportive housing. Some leave, but they remain permanent. They remain stably housed. So now I'll go over, and I'm going to try to keep this real brief. I know I had told myself I was going to talk for 20 minutes, and I'm getting up there. So we did some system modeling using the Homeless Management Information System. This is our coordinated entry system. The intake that we use, the program that we use to match clients and services is called CHAMP, Coordinated Housing Assessment and Match Plan. All this data is an undercount. It only counts those individuals and households that are seeking services, and that's not everybody.
Sorry, just how do you measure the seeking services part?
That they've contacted one of the homeless serving agencies and have accepted case management or outreach or transitional housing or emergency shelter. So this would include anyone going into CARM. This would include anyone in transitional housing. It would include anyone who was getting case management at CAC or VMC.
Okay, thank you.
So the current CHAMP waiting list, if we were to find enough units to house everyone who is currently, they've had their CHAMP assessment, they're waiting to be housed, what we would need is 586 cheap single-bedroom efficiency apartments, and then 91 multi-bedroom apartments. So you can see the vast majority of people who are on that waiting list for housing are singles. And then we do have some families and multi-person households. Average days to housing, so Councilman Roberto, this is definitely what I was talking about when I said it takes about 4 months. I have this broken out by individuals and families. The interesting thing is that the time to housing is about the same, but you can see that individuals wait a lot longer to be referred to case management and to receive case management, and families really don't wait very long at all. We're doing a very good job in this community of connecting homeless families with case management resources quickly. But our issues with housing stock mean that they wait about the same amount of time anyway before we can actually get them housed and get them out of homelessness.
So is that chart telling us that if you're an individual who has begun experiencing homelessness, on average, you're going to spend 129 days until you get housed. And then if you're a family or a group of more than one individual, 128 days.
Correct. And this is from the time they get their CHAMP assessment. So from the time that they reach out to an agency, talk with someone, get assessed, and get put into the coordinated entry system. But essentially what you're saying is exactly right.
The
Yep.
same thing. So, and then you mentioned earlier that, when you enter into this period of time where you've been experiencing homelessness for longer than a year, and I think you classified that as chronic homelessness, you begin to have physical issues, maybe that you had before but have worsened, mental health disorders maybe you had before but have worsened. Is the same thing happening for individuals at that 129-day level?
The short answer is yes. This graph is only talking about individuals and families who have been through the coordinated entry system and gotten housed. There's a whole nother set who are still on the waiting list. And here are their wait times for services. So these are people who are currently on the waiting list. And these figures are not cumulative. Each one of these current wait times down the right side of that chart is the number of days they have waited for each step in the process. Waiting 2/3 of a year for just a referral to case management, and then waiting the better part of a year for a case management intake. That's a lot of waiting. And you can tell anyone who got their CHAMP assessment and is still on the list right now is pretty obviously falling into that chronically homeless category. They've been homeless way longer than a year.
So let me clarify that. So we're saying on average 128, 129 days from beginning not being housed to being housed on average.
For those who are able to get housed.
Who those are able to. But what we're talking about here is, the folks that were outside of that average.
Yeah, these are the folks still on the wait list.
They're still on the wait list, and so they could be waiting how long?
Over a year, 2 years. It's too long.
Councilwoman Parker has a question.
Thank you. And so we have this wait list of folks who've become a part of the wait list through the CHAMP system. But then we have a whole other group of folks who, perhaps they're just living in an apartment, the rent is increased, now they're looking for subsidized housing. I don't know if KCDC is still maintaining a wait list or what that looks like, but I'm wondering, how do those two wait lists work together, or how are they managed?
So they're separate. That's a very good question. KCDC maintains wait lists by development at this point. So if you want to live at Austin Homes, you put in an application there. You might also put in an application at Western Heights, and then you're on two separate waiting lists. KCDC has also moved to a first come, first serve approach, where those who you're on the waiting list in order of the time that you applied. It used to be that they had a series of what they called preferences, where someone who was elderly might be moved ahead of someone who was not, but they have gotten rid of those, and it's just first come, first serve. I am very interested. That change only happened, I think, a few months ago, so I'm interested to hear from them how it's going. But they're separate wait lists. So the wait list in coordinated entry is really a way to match clients with an appropriate level of service. As you can see, case management tends to be the gateway to that. One of the things that you see here in this chart is that we have a lack of case management capacity in our community, and also that, again, a lack of enough housing stock that is attainable and sustainable for the people who are on this list. That's a great question. Thank you.
Councilwoman Ryder?
I have several questions, so we'll see what we get through. First, I'm going to start with who's providing the case management, and how many organizations are doing it, and how many of them are there? What's the capacity? Obviously not enough. We've already determined that, nailed down. Who is it? How many? Where?
So we have several dozen organizations that
Okay.
are theoretically taking referrals through the coordinated entry system for case management. The big ones are the ones that you would expect.
Like
CAC, VMC, Salvation Army, CARM does some case management as well. What we are seeing in practice is that most of them have such a backlog of people waiting for case management that they are not taking referrals through coordinated entry at this point because they don't want to add to the wait list that they already have, which I can understand. I mean, at some point, that becomes self-defeating. So I can get back to you with an exact number of organizations that theoretically would take referrals for case management through coordinated entry. But the actual number of organizations taking referrals is very small. I mean, it's under 5 at this point.
Okay. So it's also not helpful to necessarily, so the case management part, even if you have more people doing case management or more organizations, or you broaden the scope of, I'm assuming, are they social workers? Like, what's the background of the case managers mostly?
Yeah, they're social workers.
Okay.
I think many are master's level, but not all of them necessarily. It could
Okay.
also be a bachelor's level social worker sometimes.
Okay, so even if you increase that and people get case management sooner, then they're still on these wait lists and there's no housing or place for them to go. And I guess it might, if you said there's like a dozen organizations that have the case managers, then maybe they all do their different things, but if I'm on a wait list for hundreds of days, just to get to intake, and then I do intake, but then I'm on a wait list for housing, are there follow-ups to be like, are you still alive? Are you still reachable? So, for example, there's a guy that is commonly camping in our neighborhood, and not that there's just one, but one specific one. And I've called VMC and they're like, thanks for letting us know where he is because like he's up for housing, but we didn't know where he was because he moves around. And then, so that's I guess what I'm getting at is how do you do follow up with a transient moving person like that? Many of them are, to be able to say it's your turn, or I mean, how is that? It's just shot in the dark. I mean,
Not quite a shot in the dark, but close. So homeless outreach teams are a real asset in terms of trying to keep track of people, but it is a very transient population, and that is one of the reasons that we see these long wait times is simply that it is very easy to lose track of someone, even if you're trying to reach them, even if you're doing, follow-ups every 2 to 4 weeks. You're not going to be able to keep track of everybody. They're going to lose their phone. It's going to get stolen. It's going to get broken, So you're correct. Like, the transience of the population means that it is tough. It can be tough to keep track of them. And so even when their number comes up, sometimes it's very difficult to find them to let them know that. But homeless outreach, like I said, homeless outreach teams do a lot of work in this regard.
and what is our current, at one point we had about 10 individuals doing homeless outreach. What are we at now? We had 10 staffers at different organizations.
I don't have the exact number off the top of my head. I know it's lower than 10 now. We lost some funding. Some of that was COVID era funding, and some funding has been lost for outreach.
So pre-COVID though, I came on council in 2017, we were at 10 or 11. We had some at CAC with Misty. We had some at VMC. The county hired one, and I feel like there was a third place the others were, but I could be wrong.
CAC and VMC.
This was before your time doing this, so I apologize.
No, you're fine. CAC and VMC are the big dogs when it comes to homeless outreach. There are other teams in the community. CARM has a homeless outreach team. Let me look and make sure of the correct number of outreach workers, and I can get back with you on that.
Okay. Real quickly, I'll throw my questions out there because I know my colleagues want to ask questions. If you go back to the slide where you had the wait times for families versus individuals, and the wait time was like the same, of the percent, if 100% of the population going through the system falls in either families or individuals, or, a family unit and individuals, what percent is families and what percent is individuals?
Individuals make up the vast majority.
Was it like 80%? I can't, or was there a slide before this
there we
that,
go.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is those on the current
So
wait
this is a
list.
good way to quantify it. So that's 91 family units versus 586.
Yep.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Councilmember Roberto.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. What I was thinking about during this discussion now was, once housed, what percentage stay housed versus return to experiencing homelessness at some point? Do you have any statistics on that?
Yes. So the percentage that stay housed across the board is in the 90s. It's good. I mean, once we can get people stably housed, they generally remain that way.
And is that because it's permanent supportive housing, or is it any type of housing?
That statistic is for permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing.
And then thinking about the warming centers, how, obviously, a huge amount of thank you for coordinating that effort, and then for the, the churches that were doing this really critical work, and for the volunteers that have helped with that. So that goes without saying, but I think it does need to be said. How did, because this is something you and I talked about last season, how did the relationship building between the folks that were coming in who were experiencing homelessness and the outreach teams go? Were you able to build relationships there? Because I know a lot of times there's a trust issue there with, what looking at even accepting help. So how did that go? Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So building relationships at the warming centers, I think one of the reasons we had so many more people this winter come to warming centers than we did last year is that we managed to build some credibility and build some trust around the effort, and that was good. My staff and I did a series of interviews with people at the warming centers, and I heard a lot of people say, because the people coming to the warming centers are generally service averse. So they're people who are not going to CARM, they don't have a case manager, and generally are camping, and they don't really ever come in unless they really have to, which they did this winter. So what I heard from people there when I talked to them was, I used to have a case manager, but they only just put me on wait lists. There's a wait list for everything. And I got tired of it, and I'm just going to do things on my own. And there was also, I will say, I talked to a fair amount of people who had it seemed to me they had some mental struggles going on, with sort of an avoidance of help and an avoidance of other people that was rooted in trauma. So I think the warming centers are a really good first step, but I think really building trust with people who are service averse is going to involve getting our housing and our services to a level that getting on a wait list actually makes sense.
I'll just add a couple questions and a comment if that's okay. Did I hear you say right that there's only 5 agencies that have case managers that after the CHAMP assessment happens, when they are assigned a case manager, there's only 5 agencies that have?
That are
them?
currently taking referrals. There are
Yes.
many dozens of agencies that have case management capacity and that are theoretically taking referrals, but many of them are so backed up
Right.
that the number actually taking referrals right now is under 5.
Right, so even if there's a certain amount of trust established or, there's an initial raise of hand that I want help, they go through the process, there's an immediate logjam there in terms of people that can stick with them and check in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was something that we heard across all the, 80-plus interviews we did with people who are currently homeless is there's a waiting list for everything, and it is extremely frustrating.
Well, my church was one of the ones that eventually took a night and was a warming center, and Councilwoman Helsley came, and so I've been to a few of these, but it stayed up all night with some folks and, knew a lot of these things, but the trust that is established in those moments, I think at night in the warming centers, and we've talked about this at length, it can also be established during the day with the right space and trust. And I think one of the things that I took away from the warming center was that a day space where is indoor and resources are available and that trust can be established is a big hole in our community now as well. We have a physical day space, but it's outdoors, and it's not really a place you go for grounding, resource, trust establishment. So I'm not saying this to you, we've talked about this at length, but it bears repeating. That moment of trust in the warming center can be there during the day, and is there when somebody makes their way into a case manager. So, but it was just affirming to me for that.
Agreed. Yep.
Councilmember Thomas.
Yes, regard to the warming centers, one of the questions that I get most frequently from my constituents is, why can't we use existing park facilities or rec centers, brick and mortar type things that have to do with the park department, I suppose. And I think more for the public than for me, because I've had this discussion. But if you would tell us a little bit about why we aren't using some of the facilities that we have with the city for the warming centers.
That's a great question. So the city, at the last minute and with a great leap of faith, last winter opened the South Knoxville Community Center to act as a warming center. It was much welcome by the population of people around Vestal who needed a warming center. All things considered, it went well. Maybe don't ask Cheryl Ely that question, but I think it went well. And but the only reason that it worked was that there was nothing going on in that space during the day. That week, the January before last, because of the ice, everything was shut down for basically 7 days. That was the only reason that space was available to be used. And this actually, this was a conversation I had a lot with people before we started warming centers. They said, well, there's all this space in the community. There's city and county facilities, there's churches, and they all just are empty. And what I have found is that is really not true. They're not empty. And the same goes for local government facilities as for churches. These spaces are in use constantly for things like Boys and Girls Club, aftercare programs, for things like daycares, for things like, neighborhood basketball teams practicing. I mean, these spaces are not empty. And so that is one of the things that makes it especially difficult to consider using local government facilities. The South Knoxville Community Center, for example, couldn't be used as a warming center this winter because it never shut down. They have Boys and Girls Club in there. They have programming in there from early in the morning until, 6 p.m. or after at night. And in a way, that's heartening, right? Our community spaces are not empty, they're being used.
Yes, that's, if I may, that's consistent with what Ms. Ely told me when I had asked her about those. And praise to the churches who have stepped up and provided this kind of service and can probably do it as well as anybody, really. So I would like to see churches expand their service in that area. Thank you.
If I may just add one comment to that is, having set up and torn down for some of these warming centers, I got finished and thought, there's no reason, there's no less inconvenience or disruption to a church than there is an architecture firm with a big room. I mean, I say that a little bit jokingly, but it's as much trouble to move pews and chairs and everything else in a church as it is to move pews and desks, et cetera, in a firm that has a big room in it. So I would actually extend the invitation to any for-profit that wants to totally disrupt their place for a week to give it a shot, because I think it's the same logistics.
Yeah. And if I could just follow up on that, and I certainly didn't mean to diminish the
Yeah,
problems
yeah,
that some of the churches do, because I realize that it's an undertaking, and it's not something that can be easily done. So I realize that. The ones who've been able to do it deserve extra credit, because I know it's not easy for the reasons that my colleague just stated.
Councilwoman McKenzie.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Aaron, just want to, thank you for this information. It's very detailed and always good to get the updates and see the numbers, which, of course, while we're seeing improvement, we still have far too many people who are unhoused and in need of services. Could you talk briefly about any synergies that you're seeing as it relates from the county perspective, or what are your thoughts about possibilities of synergies and working more closely together?
Well, the biggest synergy that I see is having a coordinated effort across both entities where these conversations can happen, both with city and with county. Definitely seeing a more strategic approach already, even though our plan isn't ready, seeing a more strategic approach already to talking about how we deploy resources and where we can get, and how we look system-wide to figure out where we can get the most value for taxpayer dollars. And I think once the strategic plan is ready, that's just going to accelerate.
Will that strategic plan also break down the monetary commitment, city and county? Or could we get that level of detail when you get to that space?
Monetary commitment to OHS or monetary commitment to homeless services in general?
All of the above.
Basically, the answer is yes, we have that bird's eye view.
Okay.
I have questions about how, the best way to communicate it, that's all.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. Well, we'll look forward to that at some point. Thank you. I know a lot of times when the conversation comes up around homelessness, that a lot of people always look to the city. But this is a concerted effort a joint effort between the city and the county. And so I would just like for us, as we're talking through it, to hear more about that synergy, and even from a county perspective. That's where I was going with it.
absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll be very, very brief. Definitely stop me for questions. I've talked already about the public listening sessions that we did. Takeaways are not a surprise to you, I think. People have a lot of fear. They avoid certain areas of town if they feel there's going to be a large and active homeless population in those places. They have a lot of anger about the effects of homelessness on the community. They're very worried about the economic impact on tourism, on businesses, on property values. They want to help without enabling, but they don't know how. We heard that from a lot of people. Basically, they want a compassionate, practical approach that respects people who are homeless as human beings, but also opens up pathways for self-sufficiency. And to me, those things are the same. If we're respecting them as human beings, we should be, as much as possible, opening up pathways to self-sufficiency. interviews and focus group with people with lived experience. A lot of the takeaways there I've kind of talked through already. Relationships and connection are vital, not only with professional outreach and case management workers, but also with family and faith communities. One thing that is working well is getting food, clothing, and basics. There are places where people can go that are very low barrier to get these things, and that is working pretty well. For any services beyond the basics, it's very difficult. This is where we heard so much about waiting lists and the frustration there. There are a lot of perceived barriers to services. A lot of people who are homeless, they didn't want to go to an agency or a church where they felt they would be treated badly. And it is very possible they had not had that experience of being treated badly, but felt that they would. And to me, that says something about the tenor of our conversation as a community about homelessness. We do have quite a few individuals who are unhoused who are working. So we heard quite a bit about wages not matching the cost of living. Again, not a surprise to this body, I think. And then really deep, deep frustration at how impossible it is to rest. Can't sit or sleep anywhere. Everywhere is trespassing. We have no access to toilets. Needing safe places to store belongings and documents. Transportation, trying to get transportation anywhere is a serious struggle. Many people who are unhoused said that criminal justice involvement makes it almost impossible to get housed or to get a job, and that was a serious issue. And I have to put this in there. We heard a lot that warming centers were helpful.
Just on that, there were a few days during the winter where there weren't enough shelters or weren't enough volunteers. I'm hoping that we start planning for December now.
Absolutely.
I mean, it seems like we can start to engage churches and for-profits and anybody that'll be a warming center now. Get a list of volunteers going now. Like, I think we've done it twice. There's a good ramp time now to get ready. I count, 75 caring people in the room today that we can get signed up maybe somehow. But I'm serious about our ability to plan now, because we've done this twice and it's working.
Yes, absolutely. And that is exactly what we're doing. First step is going to be an after-action review with the organizations that were involved to figure out what went well and what didn't. So I'm on the same page.
Councilwoman Parker has a quick question. Maybe not quick, but you have a question.
No, just to add that I do think I'm happy to hear about this after action report and analysis that will go into what has worked well and what hasn't, to prepare for next year, because I do think, there are different circumstances to keep in mind. When bad weather comes, that's not necessarily something that everyone feels comfortable getting out into or driving in. So someone might, want today to be a volunteer, but once their house is surrounded by snow and they're not feeling so confident, they're not as reliable. And so I look forward to hearing more of the takeaways and lessons learned from this past 2 years and things that we can improve on moving forward. And one other thing I wanted to say, we were talking earlier about our supportive outreach teams, and I was trying to find a report where I remember in one of our annual action plans, we had made a shift and stated that we were going to reduce our funding of street outreach until we could increase our rapid rehousing resources. And so I don't know if that's still a policy, but I would hope now that we're in the process of creating our next 5-year consolidated plan, that we're learning and we're hearing the value of those street outreach workers, even when those housing resources aren't there, to maintain that stability, to maintain those connections, and connect folks to whatever services that we can.
Thank you for that.
Councilman Thomas?
Yes, a comment and then just a question, but it looks like from the data and the graphs, it seems like one thing has proven itself, and that's permanent supportive housing. If you look at data that we have with the rates of homeless, chronic homeless that drop, that can be directly attributed to when we opened a permanent supportive housing. And then the low recidivism rate. You were talking about 90% of those who were housed don't go back to the street. So this is working. This is working. So the question is, how do we do more of it? And then I guess kind of a refresher course for me and for the public is, where are you seeking funds to build more of these?
So very briefly, and you'll hear more about it in a moment, but permanent supportive housing is definitely part of the solution. Permanent supportive housing is appropriate for one very specific section of our homeless population, and that is people who've been homeless longer than a year, who have a disabling condition and are unable to work. And so it is definitely a part of the solution. I don't ever want to say it's the whole solution, because we have a whole lot of people who don't fall into that level of vulnerability, at least not yet. In terms of funding, every single permanent supportive housing facility we have in this community has been built with a funding stack that is as diverse as you can imagine. Tax credits, local funding, state funding, federal funding, private dollars, investors. It's a yes and kind of situation. So, looking to the future for the next permanent supportive housing development, we would be seeking all the funding sources. And I will say the city's affordable housing fund has been a huge help in terms of getting gap financing and really putting these projects over the edge to make them work. That's been instrumental.
Okay, thank you.
So community priorities, these are, again, this plan is not finished because the COC board is not yet around to approve it. And I know we're getting close to time. This is like the next to last slide, I think. So the priorities that I'm hearing, or at least the issues that we're hearing from the public and from people with lived experience, these are the things that will help us the most. We need increased homeless shelter space and programming, increased homelessness prevention services, increased rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing resources. And one of our goals is very likely going to be to reach functional zero for one subpopulation, like veterans or youth, to start. You will see that case management is not on this list. Case management is not on this list because, just as Councilwoman Ryder said, until we have resources to put people in, increasing our case management merely increases our capacity to put people on waiting lists. So let's focus on getting the resources out there. That's going to allow us to make more efficient use of our current case managers, and then to see where we can get after that. Next steps, tentative timeline. Next month, we will continue to work with service providers to finalize details of the plan. In April, we are hoping that the COC board will be created and meet for the first time. We will seek approval for the plan at that time. And then starting in May, we'll be implementing plans for community priorities. And I did have a couple of very brief slides about what the city is doing to help. Kevin was kind enough to share these with me, and I'm not going to go over them because I know we're almost at time. Basically, the city has put immense resources and immense care into trying to improve this situation, and really is having a lot of good effect in the community. Permanent supportive housing, every year for the past 4 years, we've had permanent supportive housing coming online with significant city investment. This is 218 units alone over the past 4 years, which is incredible. And that's it. Any questions for the last however many minutes we have?
I'll lob one up to get started. Prevention services, looking back to the data we have, about 2/3 became homeless because of eviction, job loss, could not afford housing. I don't know if those are ranked in order of.
Lack of affordable housing is the largest at 46%.
Okay. And then the eviction one and lack.
Eviction's about 10%.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to bring up, on that note, council heard from legal aid of East Tennessee, and they've got pretty good data that suggests that they're being very effective at this eviction bucket. Are you all working with them, or is that, talk a little bit about engagement with that group?
Yes. I've been working and talking with Legal Aid about their program and the great work that they're doing. It is very helpful to step back and look at this from a system perspective. Right now, we have COVID-era rental assistance funds, and so we are able to pay, or the county is able to pay back rent for some people who are in the process of eviction. They're able to help with some other costs. That funding is about to go away and will not come back. So from a system perspective, not having those rental assistance funds makes any kind of prevention very difficult.
Okay. Councilwoman Ryder.
Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna put Mr. DeBose on the spot and just ask him a quick question. It's a timing thing. I've brought it up in meetings before. So we know permanent supportive housing works and we need more of it. And often when we do it, it costs a lot of money per unit, a lot per unit. I've got a question for you buried in this. Building new buildings from brick from the ground up and renovating old buildings and whole buildings costs a lot. So I just specifically, one of the conversations I had with Becky Wade way back when was about the Cove in Savannah. So I know you're familiar with that, and I brought it up one time and somebody was like, did you mention that specifically because Kevin used to be there? I'm like, no. When were you in Savannah with their housing authority or whatever you were with there?
I worked in Macon, Georgia.
Okay, so you weren't in
However,
Savannah.
I have visited
Okay,
the village there.
the Cove, yeah.
And I've spoke with the housing authority, and that's a real good case. And then just let me speak to that
Sure.
real quick.
Because I think it's a great model.
So the community
Yeah.
raised the funding
Okay,
for this tiny home community. And it's absolutely
targeted
gorgeous.
at veterans for
Yeah.
everyone else in the room
Veterans
listening.
is gorgeous.
Yeah,
Has a nice layout. The challenge for the Public Housing Authority there is they have become fundraisers because they have to raise the ongoing operations each year. So they have to raise about $1 million a year.
for the supportive housing side
For
of
the
things?
supportive housing,
Okay,
for
because
the-
it is
for
PSH.
For the
Okay.
upkeep of the facilities. What we've done is something different. We've tied project-based vouchers to each of our permanent supportive housing units, which gives it a monthly income source. So therefore, those projects
It ends
are
up-
very close to being sustainable moving
Okay.
forward.
It's more self-funding, the
More
way that it's
self-funded,
financed.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
I guess I just mention it not so much for the funding side of it, because that's not something that I'm aware of. And when I drive by and take pictures of the window, the one down in Savannah, and if anybody goes to Savannah, it's right off of downtown. It's very easy to find, actually, just stumbled across it. I wasn't looking for it. I think it was when they just had phase one. I actually was down there right before COVID. That's when I first saw it. It's just, I think, less dollars per square foot. And what I will say is, when we look at these big numbers of 500 plus individuals versus 91 family units looking for places, this isn't per se just about like housing and homelessness. Whenever you talk to anyone who's starting a new project anywhere, if they're, I don't know, people like even like house flippers, they love to buy tiny, not tiny homes, small, post 1940s homes that are small and tear them down and build bigger because everybody wants a 3-2, a 3-2, a 3-2. Nobody's building. That's why that list is so big. Nobody's building studios and one bedrooms. And that's not just about homelessness and that vulnerable population. It's even about our seniors. A lot of our seniors, a lot of our adults, a lot of our youth need smaller units of housing, and just nobody wants to build it. it's just not a sexy thing to build. It's not financially, there's no incentive to build that on the financial end of things. So it's almost like it always somehow has to be subsidized or whatever. But anyway, there's just other models out there that I think are more financially, like that, the Cove, that seem more financially doable, is I guess my point. Rambling on. I don't know if Debbie's looking at me like I didn't make a good point, but anyway, it's a very sustainable model, thing that they've built down there, and it's beautiful, and these people have their own unit of housing, and I don't know. I feel like the permanent supportive housing we've done in the past has such a high price tag per unit that is my concern. And what are other models, not the financing side of it. You guys have your hands on that, and that is not my thing. I don't finance that side. It's the model of the actual build and the structure. Like, is there a less expensive way of
Yeah,
doing it?
And I think the challenge is, we look at the total cost and say, wow, that's a big number. But what I really look at is what it costs the local community here. And, what we're doing is gap financing. The majority of the funding is coming from low-income housing tax credits and other highly leveraged sources that are not our local resources. So we're spending $1 million, $2 million on some occasions per project, which would
city.
which is the city, which would be in line with what was done in Savannah. And then they have to go each year. So I do think it's worth looking at tiny homes and exploring that. I know Knox County is having some success there. I'm very interested, but I think one thing that concerns me is that, we want to have housing for 20-year affordability period that is, as you mentioned, sustainable, that does not cost us, arm and a leg for upkeep and things ongoing, because then it becomes a different challenge each year to raise that money.
Okay, thanks.
Councilwoman Parker.
Oh, thanks. Two things. I kind of want to follow up on that conversation because I'm also a fan of tiny home villages as a model for kind of like transitional housing for people experiencing homelessness, and worked with a group in Knoxville who had purchased some land to create a tiny home village, and went through the zoning process with them and learned about the barriers. And one of the largest barriers is allowing those social services in that residential setting. So they would have to go through planned development, which made it a longer, more intensive process. And ultimately, they decided not to move forward with it. But there are, I think, some changes that we could make in our zoning code that could help promote these types of developments. The other thing I wanted to say is when we look at these community priorities and we talk about increasing our homeless shelter space and programming, I'm going back to the idea of case management. When I've worked with shelters in the community who are just community members kind of jumping in, and they've created a space, but they're not, they don't have a case management background, they tend to get overwhelmed in a lot of cases, and welcome when they're able to connect with CAC and get somebody to visit them every once in a while who can, first of all, get folks onto those waiting lists that are so frustrating, but at least start the process for them and give them a little bit more guidance than what they're able to give. So I just imagine that as we have that need to increase the shelter space, those spaces are going to need to be serviced to some degree by case managers.
Well, absolutely. And so when I say shelter space and programming, that's exactly what I mean, because you're right. That's true.
Councilwoman Helsley.
Actually was looking at you, Lauren, and I was thinking about where I was raised in South Knoxville, which is literally all two-bedroom, one-bath, post-World War II houses. So if somebody go buy some of those, y'all could use them, because they're still there. Just saying. I don't know how that works in with Mr. DeBose's work, but with Director DeBose. But at any rate, I want to thank you for the great information. This is helpful. And I was going to ask about the strategic plan, but then you answered the question on the last slide. So we're ready when you have it. It's fun, it's exciting. We're excited, or I'm excited. And thank you, Ariel, and Brittany. Thank you. And we're glad you have a team, that you're not alone anymore.
Me too. Well, I wanted to say special thanks to this council for all of the thoughtful ways that you have supported increasing housing stock in thoughtful ways for specific populations. It makes a difference. It makes a huge difference, and you've done a lot of work, and I appreciate it.
Councilmember Thomas.
Yes, just very briefly, since Councilperson Helsley volunteered some places in her district, I want to reiterate a conversation you and I had yesterday about potential sites in my district that were very promising. Some of them would be rehabbed along Merchants Road possibly, or Callahan. So you're welcome to come into my district anytime, and we will talk. And I know there's appropriate sites there that we wouldn't have to have maybe a zoning tweak, but the infrastructure would be there. And we're looking at even old motels on that could be rehabbed. So we will continue this conversation. But as along with my companion over here, there are places in my district I welcome you to.
And I can vouch for you can put a whole lot of people in a two-bedroom house. I'm just saying.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I just had one more question. A lot of what we talked about are about the big kind of structural buckets of housing, agencies with permanent supportive housing, formal case managers, and these priorities align with what my opinion is of the matter, but there's a lot of detail to unpack below each of these. And so one of the thoughts I have and just lived experience in working with a lot of these different agencies over the years is we need permanent supportive housing, we need sustainable funding models. All of those are big structural investments. We keep investing it. The city continues to do so. We would like the county to do more in joining us. But those are big chunks at a time. They also take time. So they're all in kind of years and years and years of, and sometimes what we're left with thinking is the only thing we can do in the near term is kind of keep chipping away at the existing things we have. And I think what I've witnessed is, though, there's a middle ground of the right person, maybe not an official case manager, as Councilman Parker was kind of suggesting. There's a lot of people that help find one bedroom for one person at this one nonprofit. And there's a lot of individual nonprofits that have these little pockets in this one bed tonight, or now they have one or they're finding beds in outside the county, an hour away. And so there's an inventory of these smaller opportunistic spots that I feel like are there. I have witnessed many times people that day find a bed for somebody for a week to get into it. So I don't want to miss the middle ground, I think, that is there right in front of us that we can help solve while we wait and invest in these long structural things. And to me, that looks like the Bergen County kind of the day center space that they have and other places where if you walk into a room or a day center and their agencies that are helpful are there, if you raise your hand and say, I want help, we should have a place where you can walk in that day and get access to whatever resources there are. And at a minimum is a touch point, because of what you said, is that it's exhausting to be homeless. You can't rest. You can never. I met a woman today. She was melting down in the parking lot. We walked for a half mile and she just needed a safe space to get herself together. We'll then open the conversation with somebody that was there who's not an official caseworker, but was able to kind of triage, getting her back into CARM. So there's a huge swath of middle area that I feel like we can help solve where people kind of bounce off while they're waiting for the long-term solution. So we're not helpless in the near term of helping people find this bedroom, that bedroom, this agency. The warming center I was in, I think there were like 10 people who came in who didn't realize they could get back into CARM. And so in the middle of 20-something degrees, we literally walked them, some of them, over to CARM with them on the phone and freed up 10 more beds for people who weren't allowed back in CARM or for whatever reason. So there's this middle area that's just like triage where there is inventory out there, but it's not on a formal waiting list, KCDC, et cetera. So we're not helpless in the near term. It's too much to take on, but there's a lot of people that can be saved with immediate resources and funding a place where people can walk in. So that's my last time to plug for this. But I just feel very strong with it, having been in this space for a very long time in this community. Are there any other questions? Councilwoman Parker.
I am curious, I imagine, when I picture what you just described, I picture CAC. And so I'm trying to understand what would be different than CAC.
So I want to mix a few things together, but the perfect, like at ETSU, they have a center. What is the name of that?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, it's
I should
funded-
know that off the
It's
top of
okay,
my
but-
head.
But they have something similar. Bergen County, the woman that came that talked about functional zero, and there's, what it looks like is an inside place where you can walk in and CAC, CARM, VMC, and 10 smaller nonprofits that have 4-bedroom homes that protect women who are escaping abusive relationships all have a seat. And so you walk in, and whatever resources we have to bear in the community, there's no question because they're all in the room. And I've just seen it so many times where that happens haphazardly, they're able to find a bed that night for somebody. And so there are these little pockets of opportunity. And the one in New Jersey, behind that room, or that big place, are a lot of beds that basically operate like the foyer used to. So you have a day space where somebody can walk in and get resources from whatever we have is there. And if you qualify or need a low barrier shelter bed, that's the back of the house where there's 30-something beds. So,
And we do have lots of kind of less formal providers in the community who are providing this kind of aid. And it's needed. It's absolutely needed, and we want to support it. I do want to point out that one place where this is happening for a very specific population is the homeless court. So homeless court, it happens at CAC, and that it's exactly that model. They have all the providers in one place, and again, they have about 15 people a week who are on the docket, and they can come there and just go from table to table. Okay, well, I need this, this, and this. Can you help me with that? How about that? And it's working well. They're seeing good outcomes. So, I think the model you're talking about is important. I think one of the questions is going to be agency capacity to really come together and do that. I think that's a question mark. And I think it is happening. I mean, at Care Cuts, for example, it's happening there as well. But yeah, I definitely want to have that conversation. It needs to be part of the strategic plan.
I love all the agencies that do this work. If you get funding from the city, you should have some amount of capacity to be at the space where somebody walks in and you have a seat, a desk there. I've seen it happen in gravel on a cold Sunday, and we need a space where people can walk in, and that happens every day. It's not free, as we all know. Any other questions? We have come a long ways in the 2 years you have been here as a community, and it's not, no shortage of gratitude for yourself, Mr. DeBose, Ms. Ball, everybody in this community. We didn't have a warming center 2 years ago, and it was freezing then. And now we just house 7,000 bed nights, which is a new metric term I've come to learn. But from every graph, it's clear that we're not there, and we need more permanent solutions that can sustain sustain the need. With that said, if there's no other questions, we will continue the effort together with you. Thank you for being here.
Thank
We're
you.
adjourned.